What do rich people spend money on that we could never imagine exists? A quote unquote household chief of staff? Not a butler, but a logistical CEO for their personal lives who manages the pilots, the yacht crew, the multiple estate managers, the nannies, the art curator, and the person who makes sure the fridge in their fourth home is stocked before they arrive. They're buying a complete insulation from the friction of reality. I guess money can't buy happiness, but it can buy complete insulation from the friction of reality, and that's basically the same exact thing, right? And before I forget, other me's on Rufus stories doing what he does best, unpacking some crazy relationship stories. It's a good time, I promise. Links in the description if you're down. All right, back to the stories. Story 2. Knew this one dude who bought a vacant piece of land in the Hollywood Hills just to pour asphalt over it so his guests had a valet parking spot right next to the mansion we were throwing a huge party at. The asphalt had just a few days to dry before cars started showing up. It came close to the wire, and the guests in their exotic imported sports cars never knew. Also, the same guy would have sushi from Japan from the Tsukiji market flown into the US, and before eating it, would need to see a certification that the fish was caught no more than 15 hours prior. He would also pay the restaurant, can't mention what restaurant specifically or even where, tons of money to close down so he could eat the sushi in peace alone with his wife. The guy was a schmuck, by the way. Story 3. Family offices. They hire a team of people to manage their wealth, an office with their own investment bankers, lawyers, accountants, financial planners, etc. I was approached as a junior/mid-level lawyer to join. I wasn't that interested, so I asked for a good pay bump. I think it was around USD $280,000 per year, not including bonuses and perks. This was some years ago. They agreed. Imagine how much more senior bankers, accountants are getting paid. And then imagine being wealthy enough to pay for an office full of them. Story 4. Childcare for their autistic children. I dated a woman a decade ago who was a PhD in child psychology, and she made a literal fortune being a babysitter for ultra-wealthy kids on the spectrum. Just to take an ad hoc FaceTime call if the kids were having a meltdown when she wasn't there, it was $500 every 15 minutes, took multiple of these calls daily, sometimes a dozen different 5 to 10 minute calls in a day from the same family, billed in at the start of the first minute of each 15-minute block. A 16-minute call was $1,000. It was $1,000 an hour for her to be one-on-one with the kids, and folks had her booked out for months to watch their kids on weekends, date nights, etc. And she had a racket where she had a play group and would get all of them together in a pack, and each kid was $500 an hour, and she'd have like 10 to 15 of them. She was amazing with kids and had an incredible way of dealing with extreme cases, but she was making like $4 or $6 million a year, which was pretty ridiculous for playing board games most of the time. Story 5. 24/7 nanny coverage per kid with 3 kids. They had 12 total nannies on staff, plus or minus at any given time to cover weekends, holidays, days off, etc. I used to work at their kids' private school in the IT department, and they hired me to do some IT stuff at their home, as well as tutor one of their older kids. Instead of paying me cash, they would forward my email bill to the family office in NYC, and I would get an overnight FedEx package with a check every week. They also got divorced and bought mansions next to each other for the kids' sake. The mom found one for sale that she liked, and then went to the neighbor directly next door and made them an offer I guess they could not refuse. I have dealt with many high net worth people, and they are usually schmucks, and so are their kids. This particular family was unfazed by their wealth. They were the nicest, most down-to-earth people, and their kids were awesome. Before doing some work for them, I knew the kids from school, and you would have never known how wealthy and privileged they were. They were the nicest, most humble, helpful kids with a crazy amount of empathy for their age. They were an old money family, very old money, and I think it just never bothered them. They did a great job raising their kids, as is evident by the fact that you would have thought they were still married, as they attended all school functions together, talked to each other, etc. I only found out they were divorced when I was helping their son for the first time, and he said he needed to run to his dad's house to get something. The private school I was working at needed to raise $10 million for an expansion. This family offered to match all donations up to $5 million. Not only did they match every donation even after crossing $5 million, they also donated another $10 million to the school, so over $15 million total out of their pocket to the school. We only found out about their donations a few years ago. At the time, we were told it was an anonymous matching gift and an anonymous donation. They did not want anything named after them or any recognition at all while their kids were still going to school there. I guess old money is often much more grounded than new money. Story 6. I used to work for a privately held company run and owned by one individual who was earning $2 to $3 million a year. He asked me if I was interested in making extra money running errands for him. One of the errands was to measure the built-in bookshelves in his massive new house, then going to Barnes & Noble to buy enough books to fill every inch of the shelves. The only prerequisite was that the books had to make him appear well-read and intelligent. He gave me a credit card and I spent 6 hours loading a U-Haul with $11,000 worth of books. After that, I spent an entire weekend arranging the books on the shelves. He called me out back a couple of weeks later to rough up the books because it was obvious they had never been read. All in all, he paid me around $5,000 plus meals while I was there to make strangers think he read a lot. Story 8. One thing rich people spend their money on that you might not realize is hiding their wealth, and they often do it for their extended family. It can be a business under a shell corporation or an investment fund run through a series of other operations. Family members contribute money in one way or another to a business or charity that moves the money around the world anonymously. Detailed records are kept about who contributed what and how much their investment is worth. It's not criminal activity they were hiding, it's the identity of their owner, the source. On paper, this one family member is only a millionaire, but they have control of hundreds of millions in wealth of various forms all around the world. Someone might be just your average cardiologist in the US, but they and their family own a large portion of a factory in Taiwan through a holding company. The holding company is mostly owned by an investment firm who is owned by another private equity group that's mostly owned by an anonymous group and a trust, for example. It can get very complicated. They don't directly pay taxes on their wealth or income, and it's not attached to them directly, so it's very unlikely they will lose it if they get divorced or some other financial catastrophe. Story 8. Support staff in luxury goods that make TV luxury goods look cheap and paltry by comparison. The ultra-wealthy have 24-hour concierge access that gets them the best seats at the best restaurants or events on the planet. They fly private and have fleets of luxury cars at their disposal. The best part is their entire world moves with them from one estate to another. Duplicate wardrobes and a team brings their essentials from one place to another so they don't have to adapt their expectations for different locations. Just top-level everything from security to private chefs to executive assistants, plus lawyers and investment advisors as well as public image managers to protect their reputations and public image. Story 9. Rent a private island with a personal chef, helipad, and a team to look after the palm trees. Your own underground bunkers in case of an apocalypse with a swimming pool and a wine cellar. An oyster and lobster farm so you always have fresh from your own sea. Cooled garages for your supercar collection because a regular garage is too warm for carbon parts. Petting zoos with giraffes, flamingos, or even tigers. Gold toilet paper. Yes, this exists. 22 karat gold in the form of a roll. Story 10. In my country, a billionaire's youngest son is fond of animals. For him, he got a private zoo created on hundreds of acres of land. Animals from all over the world are present in his private zoo. Also, for the same son's wedding, he got Justin Bieber to J-Lo perform in his private event. He hired every big-name singer from our country to sing live in the background. It was like Spotify, but live. Singers were performing their hit songs live, veteran musicians with egos the size of moons, entertaining guests like props. Story 11. I sometimes work for a family who have 10,000 plus employees. They have a driver, a live-in chef, housemaids, 24/7 security who sit in a room with CCTV day and night, multiple gardeners who live in outhouses, and various other staff. However, that is nothing to what my sister does for a living. She is one of 5 PAs to a Saudi prince and one of the richest men on earth. I am a sole trader living in a little 3-bed in the east of England, eating into my overdraft each month, and when he heard we were having a kid, he bought us like 5,000 pounds worth of stuff and Hermes' toys for the baby costing about $1,000 each. Yes, they went on eBay. Haha. Story 12. It's also about what they don't spend money on. I've read and seen documentaries about quiet wealth, which is one of the aspects where you find the difference between millionaires and billionaires. I've seen this in real life as well when I worked at a fancy place. Millionaires will attend banquets and gatherings with a $100,000 Gucci handbag and flaunt it around. The billionaires don't carry bags because their butler has it, and many of them wear clothes with no brand. Story 13. I met a guy who designed a meeting room on Putin's yacht. The room is explosion resistant and bulletproof. It has a bulletproof screen that slides to divide the room in half, and each side of the meeting room has access from port or starboard, respectively, so 2 factions who are at war can safely get on board and discuss their terms. I've also met several billionaires, and they mostly spend their money on properties and assets, nothing out of the ordinary. I know Pele, the football player who loves street workers. He was such a nice guy. I met him twice, but he had a thing for younger women. No wonder he was always doing ads for Pfizer's ED's medication. Apart from that, billionaires spend stupid amounts of money to go see the Titanic or go to space. Story 14. My brother is a pilot for a really rich guy, and they'll send the plane to do errands like an Instacart delivery person. The guy just doesn't seem to trust FedEx, so he has his flight staff go pick things up. For example, he might say, "My wife wants this dress, can you go to NY to pick it up for her?" I once met a guy who had 100 people on his personal payroll. About 25 of them were in the family office, but between personal assistants, house managers, cooks, cleaners, drivers, landscaping, construction, yes, that's a thing, flight staff, physical therapists, tutors, and coaches, the payroll really adds up. I remember him saying it was like $10 million plus a year payroll just to manage his life. At one point, I think it was Eric Schmidt who said in an interview that he had over 300 people on his personal staff. That was during peak Google, so maybe it's been scaled down a bit. Story 15. My wife has a distant relative who is extremely wealthy with a net worth in the hundreds of millions. In addition to a full support staff and a personal chef who caters to the family's different diets, he has a team of personal assistants, each with a specific role. One of these assistants, a haggler, handles a variety of tasks to maximize savings and benefits. Her job includes booking all of his cars for servicing and repairs to ensure he's not overcharged, purchasing his luxury items with the right credit cards and coupon codes to earn maximum points and discounts, and arranging wholesale deals for the household with various suppliers. This assistant also leverages her boss's name and reputation, using a Karen with real reputational damage type of power play to get priority treatment and a remarkable amount of free stuff. Just by managing his car fleet and negotiating with dealerships, she likely saves him her salary many times over. The wholesale deals she secures are incredible, and it's clear that wealthy people often get more amazing freebies than anyone else. It's a testament to the idea that even the wealthiest individuals can be incredibly frugal. Story 16. I had a buddy in college whom I met freshman year. We knew he had money, but he was never flashy or anything. He was a really down-to-earth guy. However, we could tell his parents were well off. For sophomore year spring break, we went to his vacation house in Florida, which was located in the Keys. When we pulled up, we were all thinking, damn man, I didn't realize your parents had that much money. The house was on a canal, and on the other side was an even bigger house with a large yacht parked next to it. His dad came out and said, yeah, I never see that guy. He only bought that house to have a place to park his yacht. Now that's what I call FU money. Story 17. As an inspector, I've seen my share of impressive homes, including some with as many as 18 bedrooms and 18 bathrooms. One house had a full-size in-ground pool in the basement, complete with a gym and sauna. It also featured a movie theater, a concession room with a popcorn and candy machine, a full-size lounge, a bar area, and a secret wine cellar. The basement also included 3 guest bedrooms with attached baths, a chef's kitchen with a dumbwaiter, 3 utility rooms, and 3 elevators. In the sub-basement, there was a space with a 15-foot-high ceiling that was being prepared to be a ballroom with projectors on the ceiling that could project images onto all the walls, making it look like you were outside or surrounded by paintings. Essentially, the owner was building a subterranean holodeck ballroom, and that was just his basement. He also bought the house behind his, tore it down, and put in another in-ground pool with a pool house. He even paid the utility company to bury the power poles and wires. Another homeowner had 2 chandeliers in his dining room that cost $150,000 each. After they were installed, he didn't like the color, so he sent them back to the company and paid $50,000 each for an acid bath to change the color of the metal. The most recent house I saw had about 4,500 feet of LED tape light for cove lighting in every room, hallway, and everywhere else. The electric bill must be insane, but for these people, $50,000 is just a drop in the bucket. Story 18. A $30 peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I have a friend who went to a real-life butler school and now works at a high-end resort in the Berkshires. He says that even though the guests are incredibly wealthy, kids are still kids. A common request from the children is a simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich. However, the ingredients are anything but simple. The bread is artisanal, made from organic, fair trade, hand-ground wheat. The peanut butter is from specially selected hand-roasted peanuts ground and jarred by some quote-unquote one-eyed holy man or something equally extravagant. By the time you add up all these high-end components, a single PB&J sandwich for a 9-year-old whose parents are hedge fund managers ends up costing around $30. Story 19. I met a woman through some nonprofit work and we hit it off. When I mentioned that I like skiing, she told me her father owned a private ski resort, an entire mountain in Aspen, Colorado. I was amazed and thought she must be mistaken, assuming it was just a small hill or a ski-in, ski-out condo. A while later, I ran into her at another event and she invited me to her dad's mountain. I accepted, still thinking it would be something modest. I was completely wrong. His private driveway is a heated road that's 8 to 10 miles long. To get to the top of the mountain, he uses snowcasts and helicopters, and then he skis down. The entire place is heated and fully staffed with a guide, a medic, a butler, a chef, and a maid all year round, even though no one had used it for a few years when we visited in 2019. The fridge was constantly stocked and restocked, which led to a lot of food waste. When I saw her again about a year ago, she told me she didn't think anyone had used the cabin since our trip. Story 20. It's not about spending money the way most of us think. Sure, the fuel for a yacht or a jet might cost a few $100,000 a year or even a few million for a 150-foot vessel, but that's just chump change to them. These individuals often spend their money on throwing exclusive parties, usually for fundraising. They might spend millions to help build infrastructure in another country or host fundraisers for politicians, from governors to presidents or even foreign dignitaries. To attract more guests and raise more money for their causes, they'll hire people that most of us consider rich, like a famous musician, to perform. Their spending also goes towards things like month-long private vacations in faraway countries, where they'll mingle with royalty, politicians, and other powerful people. These aren't the influencers you see on Instagram, they are people you've likely never heard of because they value their privacy and prefer to stay out of the public eye. In my experience, they are not flashy at all. Story 21. I have a family member who is minorly rich. They don't have to worry about the cost of vacations, they drive well known luxury cars, and they live in a high cost of living area in a house that's about 6,000 square feet. What really stands out to me are the little details. For instance, he has the best coffee machine ever installed directly into the wall that makes every kind of coffee with the touch of a button. It's not as good as a high-end coffee shop, but it's close enough when you can have it in your own kitchen. All the appliances are hidden behind custom panels that match the cabinetry. For example, the refrigerator looks just like a pantry door. The artwork and flowers in the house are changed out on a regular basis. There's currently an 1100-year-old Persian bowl sitting in a guest room. Whenever I'm there, I pick it up just for the fun of it. I might even drink out of it next time. I could go on, but it's the small things that really show their wealth. Story 22. If you look up Becca Bloom on TikTok, you'll get a glimpse into a world that is unimaginable to a normal person. She is the daughter of a billionaire, and her fiancé is also an ultra-high net worth individual. She probably spends $30,000 to $50,000 a week on her shopping hauls. She shows how her private chef prepares food for her cat, and then she'll feed the cat $50 to $100 worth of food per meal. She regularly eats $200 worth of caviar with her breakfast for quote-unquote seasoning. She has some exotic imported items that are just normal to her. She was currently doing unboxings for wedding gifts she received from her rich friends and family, and it's just unreal. In some of her videos, she'll be packing her lunchbox, and people will point out that her lunchbox is a crazy designer item that costs $3,000. Yet she doesn't even mention it in the video because it's just normal to her. She'll casually mention that she got a new bag, and when you look it up, it costs $75,000. She'll discuss how she gets invited to private shopping events where a place like Hermes will give her advanced buying access to new lines or first dibs on limited edition jewelry and so on. Sometimes she just casually drops a new piece of jewelry she got and it's literally a $2 to $3 million piece. Seriously, go be mesmerized. Her name is Becca Bloom. Story 23. I have a wealthy friend who just hired a relocation concierge. This firm advised them on where to move to protect their portfolio, how to set up operations in these new places, and then help them execute the entire plan. They ultimately decided to live in Puerto Rico for 6 months a year to take advantage of capital gains tax-free living, Malta for 3 months, and the mainland US for the remaining 3 months. They moved their businesses and properties into trusts and then purchased properties and hired staff in both Malta and Puerto Rico. And if you're enjoying the video, learning a thing or two from these stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 24. I used to work in an extremely high-end condominium building. One day, one of my favorite residents, a small, older woman with a super sweet, cute dog, was standing in front of me. Another resident, a gentleman who was about a foot taller than her, walked up and they started chatting about their boats. Man, oh yeah, we just came back from the Bahamas. We docked in Nassau and had a great time. Woman, oh, I love the Bahamas. It's amazing every time we go. We're going again soon. Man, oh, what part are you guys docking in? Nassau? Woman, no, I wish. We can't dock in Nassau, unfortunately. Man, why not? Woman, our boat is too big. The look on his face was absolutely priceless. This tall, extremely wealthy man was staring down at this small 5'2" woman in utter bewilderment. He couldn't comprehend that her boat could be both bigger than his and so big that it couldn't even dock in the port of Nassau. I knew from other sources that she and her husband had a place in the Bahamas with a dock built specifically for their yacht. That was probably one of the most hilariously rich things I've ever witnessed. Story 25. I like to add 2 more points about the very rich. First, they are often exceptionally stingy and will not spend money unless it's absolutely necessary. This is in part how they become even wealthier. A prime example is Donald Trump, who has a well-documented history of cheating, underpaying, and even failing to pay thousands of contractors. However, it's worth noting that he's more of a low-class grifter and not in the same category as the truly ultra-rich we've been discussing. Second, the very rich often receive extravagant gifts that would never be offered to the rest of us. These can include multi-$100,000 cars, expensive jewelry and watches, and vacations with private jets and huge yachts, all for free. They also get complimentary access to things like Michelin star dining and the top suites in 5-star hotels. Some of this is a quid pro quo arrangement, while other times the giver, often a business or corporation, is seeking publicity by being associated with the recipient or wants to curry favor with them. Story 26. My aunt is a personal assistant for a multi-billionaire. She once told me that he built a commercial kitchen on his property for their private chefs to cook in. They already have a full chef's kitchen inside the main house, but his wife doesn't want to have to smell the food being cooked. This same man also bought all the homes directly next to his house, using the expanded property to build a full 18-hole golf course that backs up to the mountain his house is built in front of. My aunt said the plan is to eventually sell it as a resort property when his family moves on in a decade or so. Story 27. I worked for a family over 20 years ago as an interior decorator, organizer, and general assistant with my hourly rate. This family is on the Forbes rich list every year, and they own sports teams and hospitals. Three things they had that blew my mind at the time were four off duty police officers always stationed at their compound, a handyman always on staff, and a wedding present for their new son in law, a radio station. I would love to have a handyman available whenever I needed one. Before I started working for the family, I had to pass a background check and sign a non disclosure agreement. I have so many stories where I just thought, well, I guess I'll do it if you're willing to pay me. Story 28. I had a client for whom we were doing a huge addition to an already giant house, which was 9,000 square feet. We were adding a new primary bathroom and closet suite over a 3-car garage and more off the first floor. The husband was going to be away on a trip for one of the 16 weeks we were working there, so the conversation came up about where he was going. He said, I go to Las Vegas once every year. The wife gives me a budget, and I stick to it. His budget? $100,000. Imagine having that much money to blow once a year as disposable income. On this same job, I also saw one of the most ridiculous things. The client had bought full custom cabinets for the kitchen, a full-service pantry with a sink, range, fridge, and dishwasher, the laundry room, and the mudroom, which had a huge dog washing area, a crazy detail in itself. But what was even crazier was when the owner of the design company that provided the cabinets showed up in a Maserati MC20. He pulled into the driveway, looked at me, and said, I think that car is nicer than mine. Story 29. I'm an electrician and I've seen some wild stuff on the custom houses we work on. I don't work on them often, but when I do, it's crazy. One house had lights next to the front door that weren't powered by electricity. The electricity just started the flame. The light itself was fueled by natural gas. Another house had a multi-level basement. It had a regular basement and a deeper one that was a full basketball court. In that same house, they spent $400,000 on smart home switches and another $150,000 on appliances. Their budget for switches alone was more than my entire budget for my first house. Story 30. It's not so much about things that we could never imagine exist, but more about things we wouldn't even think of. For instance, there are forward teams, people who travel ahead to a location to ensure the security team has good access and that the food meets your standards, with the menu adjusted if it doesn't. There are also assistants who not only plan your private flight and car trip to your other home, but also make sure the person in charge of your wardrobe got it to the destination before you arrived, or if you already have a second set of clothes that they've been picked up from your tailor or custom designer, and if you have a second wardrobe at a different location, it's rotated and altered as needed. That meeting you have in Tokyo? No worries, your visa was approved before you even landed. The private rental has already had its security sweep and everything you might crave has already been flown in. Your whims have been anticipated and there are 15 restaurants where you already have a private room reserved in case you feel like going out. Change your mind and want to stay in? No problem. The chef was flown in 3 days ahead of time and has already bought and prepped everything to make your favorite dishes. There are so many little things that are just taken care of because that's what you pay people to do. Story 31. A friend of a friend interviewed to be the chief of staff for the Zuckerberg-Chan family, and one of the interview questions was about their sheep herding dogs, which I assume are border collies. The family wants to keep the dogs enriched and stimulated, so if they asked if the candidate would be willing to occasionally arrange for sheep to be flown in for the dogs to herd. Part of me doesn't believe this story, but another part of me feels that this is exactly the kind of eccentric, Aspie-like thing that Zuckerberg would suddenly get into. Story 32. I work at wealthy people's houses all the time. There's a lot of stuff that I see that makes me think there's a real disconnect here. But one general observation that really sticks out is the sheer number of people they pay to do things all the time. As an HVAC guy, I'll be on site and they'll have a nanny, a housekeeper, someone pressure washing the house, a pool guy, and a landscaper all there at the same time. This isn't in the midst of a home remodel, this is just a regular Tuesday. Most of us might have someone working on our home once a year, if that, but these people will have 10 or more workers a week. Story 33. Here are some first-hand experiences I've witnessed. Calling in favors. I've seen someone knock on the door of a Michelin-starred restaurant and demand that the famous chef leave his home and prepare a meal for their party without any notice. He did. Controlling the calendar. Another person had a Cirque du Soleil cancel or move a day from their tour to perform for their family. Navigating bureaucracy. I've also seen a wealthy individual get a city to approve an event at a historic protected site. Bespoke everything. For these people, everything is made bespoke for their family, literally everything. Personalized delivery. Everything is shipped, mailed, or delivered by a personal courier. Cars as commodities. A car that costs $200,000 to $300,000 is treated like a seasonal purchase from Temu. Architectural marvels. Homes aren't just built, they are researched and constructed to be architectural marvels. Full-time staff. There are aides and assistants for every aspect of life, mostly full-time, on-demand staff who keep everything perfect so that you don't have to waste time asking for it. These were people with close to $100 million to $200 million and generational wealth, so I can't even imagine what billionaires do. Story 34. They have people for everything. If they have 5 houses, they need people to manage them, handymen, gardeners, and housekeepers. If they have dogs, they need groomers, walkers, and more. If they have kids, they need tutors, nannies, and trainers. If they own horses, they need trainers and stable hands. If they like cars, they have on-site mechanics and detailers. If they want a yacht, they need a crew of at least 10 people, including a captain, navigator, cook, mechanics, and housekeeping staff. Wealthy people employ an insane number of people to maintain their opulent lifestyles. Not saying it makes it right, but they simply have to. Most of the time, the labor cost to maintain their hobbies and eccentricities is significantly higher than the initial cost of the items themselves. Story 35. I used to work for a high-end wedding catering company outside of NYC. One bride insisted that her wedding planner spend an extra $60,000 to line the walkway from the reception area to the bar and then to the entryway with special vintage lamps. The planner had to go all over to find them. Keep in mind, my company's catering services alone usually cost $70,000 to $100,000 for just the food and beverages. Another wealthy couple bought their daughter an apartment in Chelsea as a graduation gift and bought their son a sailing company so he could work there. Story 36. On French YouTube, I watched an interview with a person who organizes vacations for extremely wealthy people. Some of the wildest things he mentioned were blocking a runway for a view. Upon landing in Nice via private jet, they would stop on the runway, open the door, and just sit there, enjoying the view. They would stay for a while and pay the fines for blocking the runway without a second thought. A fleet of yachts. A client once rented 2 massive yachts, one blue and one white, so his wife could choose which color she wanted on the day they went out. Paying for everyone's hotel. A client threw a huge party in a house near a luxury hotel that cost $600 per night. Due to noise complaints, the client paid for the rooms of all the guests staying at the hotel. A Coca-Cola run. In a different interview, some Americans believe that Coca-Cola didn't exist in Europe. Upon landing via private jet, they exclaimed, "Oh crap, we forgot the Coca-Cola." They then proceeded to send the private jet back to the US and return with cans of Coca-Cola. Story 37. You're asking the wrong question. The simple answer is that the ultra-rich ask themselves, what can I spend money on that I haven't thought of yet? That's essentially a direct quote. Then anything you can possibly imagine, there will be human parasites who work to get that result, much like Jeffrey Epstein and his network. The real question is, what do the extremely rich do with all their wealth when it far exceeds their ability to spend? They buy assets. We, all the rest of us, then struggle against each other more and more for these same assets while they do the only wise thing to do with excessive wealth. Diminishing supply means greater demand for available resources, and as resources shrink, the cost becomes too expensive. We currently live in this world where oligarchs are ruling, and most of us are just beginning to open our eyes as we awaken. Be happy and at peace with your life. That is the only real wealth. Story 38. My family member is part of numerous clubs, dinner clubs, resorts, golf clubs, and more. To get his money's worth, he has to spend $10,000 eating at his home resort clubhouse each month. So when I get an invitation at the end of the month, I know I'm in for a real treat. Another example is his sports season tickets. He has them for all the major sports in multiple cities. I'll be in places I didn't even know he visited, and he'll offer me 50-yard line seats. When I sit in them, everyone around me asks me if I'm a ghost or a billionaire because they're so used to seeing the seats empty. This is especially true if that city is hosting a future Super Bowl or some other big one-time event. If having the season tickets guarantees him the right to buy tickets for those special events, he gets them and just lets all the other regular season tickets go to waste or gives them away as gifts. Story 39. Wealthy people often buy multiples of the same clothes, like a sweater they particularly like or a piece of jewelry, and then ship a set to each of their homes so they don't have to pack. They also use businesses that handle all the maintenance for them. I know a guy who had guests at one of his houses in a wealthy area while he was away in Italy. There were hornets in the yard and they stung the kids. The guests texted him about it and he texted his contact. Within 15 minutes, a team of exterminators showed up and cleared out the nest. Story 40. We sold commercial gym equipment and had a multi-billionaire client who was building a $50 million mansion and compound in California. He had to have all the equipment from his gym from a specific brand that was no longer a business, and it had to be white even though they never produced the machines in that color. He paid 10 times what the machines originally sold for in their prime. He worked with a current manufacturer to rebuild the classic machines, and then had them powder-coated white and had the old emblems and weight stacks recreated. His project manager also tipped our installation guys $1,000. Story 41. I met a guy while traveling overseas who was a very successful online professional poker player. He was genuinely confused when it came up that my travel companions and I had planned and booked our holiday ourselves. When I told him that it wasn't hard to plan a trip yourself instead of using a travel agent, he still looked confused. He explained that he just told his bank what he wanted to do, And because he was so rich, his bank organized his and his partner's passports, flights, and travel bookings for their 6-month world holiday. He was genuinely confused that the average person didn't have this service. I also found out that he had a second apartment in the same building that he used as his office because his girlfriend didn't like the way he behaved while working. Story 42. I used to work for a plumbing company that serviced the homes of the ultra-rich. On my first day, we went to the future home of a beer CEO, and that's where I learned 2 things. First, no homes in that specific area could exceed 10,000 square feet. Second, that rule only applied to the above-ground portion of the house. This meant that many properties had massive basements used for various purposes. Reportedly, one property had 4 homes above ground that were all connected underground. In the case of this beer CEO, he had a massive basement that was meant to double as a garage. Another thing I learned was that a different ultra-wealthy CEO had a quote-unquote pit basement underneath his house with multiple pistons installed to lower the windows facing the sea for parties. I love telling people this story after I show them the photos. Story 43. I work in a high-end cabinetry factory and we make large, expensive, and fancy kitchen cabinets for wealthy people. On average, a kitchen from us costs $80,000 and that's just for the wood cabinets. It doesn't include installation, plumbing, or electrical work. What really caught my eye with this question is that we recently completed a show kitchen. This is a huge, expensive kitchen that will sit unused in one of our clients' many mansions. Its sole purpose is to be a showpiece for guests who might visit on occasion. This particular kitchen was painted high-gloss black and cost well over $100,000. Story 44. I have a family member who probably has a net worth in the high 8 figures or maybe a little less. He's very secretive about it, but whatever. This man had a custom home built that was over 4,000 square feet, but then he filled his walk-in closet and all the guest closets with clothes. This started to bother him, so one day he was looking out his window and saw his neighbors, and the thought occurred to him, if I can see them, they can see me. So he went looking for a new place to build an almost identical house just with bigger closets. Apparently, the mayor of the city he lives in was planning to have a house built on a certain plot but changed his mind. My family member was told about the open plot and bought it. Since it was in a new part of the community and in the middle of a cul-de-sac with 3 plots for the building, he bought the other 2 as well so he wouldn't have any neighbors in the future. Story 45. I think money spoils everyone. I just listened to a podcast where celebrities discuss what they bought when they realized they had money. One celebrity said they didn't care about that stuff when they first became famous, but now they love to spend money on all sorts of things: skincare products, diamonds, expensive shoes, designer handbags, etc. Another bought a Ferrari as a teen and then kind of wrote off capitalism, which I love. One bought first edition books, which I also appreciate. A guest on the podcast said she bought a house for herself, fair, a house for her family, fair, and a Jeep for herself, and that all of those felt necessary. No details were given about the houses, but a Jeep is not specifically a necessity. She then turned and said that once she made it big, she started wearing designer clothes, but doesn't like that. I love the cognitive dissonance here. I'm not mocking her. I genuinely appreciated that she was thinking about it, and I was surprised that others on the podcast didn't spend much time on that topic, but it was good to hear. This feeling will probably fade in a few years when she gets used to being rich. I just can't imagine wasting money on looking good with designer clothing or cars. I can imagine the first I made it purchase being flashy, but ideally none of us need to peacock. You can't convince me that a designer anything will make me happier with my life. I can kind of understand the books though. Story 46. I used to clean a house in Croydon that wasn't particularly spectacular, just a typical detached family home. However, you could tell it was a wealthy family from the small details. They had 3 children, 2 cars, and only the husband had a job. The wife, who hired me because she knew someone I knew from a local shop, was always at home taking care of the kids. Eventually, she started sharing with me details about their family trips during the summer, and I learned they went to some very nice places. I remember one time she told me her husband would be away for about a month without any interruptions. Apparently, he belonged to some kind of club where every year they would meet on an island near Korea to watch some kind of weird games where people would pass away trying to win a prize consisting of a ridiculous amount of money. Story 47. My husband's stepdad is rich, and as a result, my mother-in-law also benefits. It wasn't until I visited for the first time that I learned what a duvet actually was. If you don't know, it's a cover for a comforter. I was so confused. I thought a comforter is a cover. I was under the impression that a duvet was another layer, like a sheet that goes under the comforter. My mother-in-law laughed and explained that a duvet is a cover for a comforter. I was still bewildered. I don't know how many people I've had in my house, but I don't know many who have been in my room or who I would care about the look of my bed covers for. A duvet apparently makes it easier to wash because it's a cover that gets dirty instead of the bulky comforter which takes up a lot of space. My little poor mind was blown when my mother-in-law told me she spent $100 on a goose down duvet. The comforter wasn't even that expensive. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.